Discord. I'll probably promote it on Twitter and stuff later.
Cool.
Hello, everyone. I'm joined today with Liana Kerzner, a feminist media critic, journalist, games journalist, and neutral on GamerGate. How are you doing?
Not bad. Not bad. Yourself?
Not too bad, not too bad. We knew each other a little bit back in the GamerGate days. We used to talk a little bit. I think I was on your show once, and you were on my show like once too.
Seems
But
so long ago. It's like, oh my God. It's one of those things like, did some of that really happen? You know what I mean?
yeah, it's like a lifetime ago practically.
Yeah, you'll have to excuse my voice. I'm a little bit hoarse right now, but I will try to choke through.
Oh, no worries, no worries. I don't know if I really need to disclose this, but I used to financially support you on Patreon. I gave you
Okay.
only for like 10 months though, and $1 a month, so you probably got like 10
Well,
bucks from me.
considering the subject matter, it's good to disclose this kind of thing. So I appreciate that. If in doubt, disclose.
True.
Yeah.
All right. So, Liana, you are a feminist media critic, and you've done your own very popular YouTube series, YouTube channel where you talk about these things. And you had a different take than Anita Sarkeesian on some issues in gaming.
Yep. To put it lightly.
Well, well, I guess first off, what's your view about what feminist media analysis should be?
Oh God, should be. Not just one thing is the short version. Like obviously there are different perspectives. Um my my views have evolved some since Gamergate. I do teach gender and game design at a local university. It's actually the university that stands in for Godwin U on Gen V, which is kind of funny. I don't know if you've seen the boys spinoff, but it it depends on what hat you're wearing, right? And it's a question of, are you coming at it from the point of view of a creator? You know, I'm making my own game right now. Are you coming at it from the perspective of a critic, or are you just a regular person who likes games? That matters, right? The where I differed from Anita significantly is essentially along, if I say sex positive, sex negative, is your listeners going to know what that means?
Well, I don't know if
Define
there'll be
it.
a whole lot of people listening, but it might be better to define it, especially for the book.
Yeah, okay. So sex positive feminism is basically sex does not inherently demean women. Heterosexual sex, of course. But sex negative feminism is more in that sort of Andrea Dworkin sphere of all straight sex is inherently some form of rape. It's demeaning that I'm really grossly oversimplifying here because we only have so much time, but I believe that the waifus, the cute anime girls are not inherently bad for women. There are a lot of other elements that determine whether something is ultimately, how do I put this? Because I don't want to say good for women or bad for women, because that's another thing I don't believe in. But whether a depiction makes sense for the purposes of the work. And that's obviously very different than the whole idea of tropes versus women, right? I don't believe a trope is against men, it's against women. A trope is a tool. So if it's used well, it can work. If it isn't used well, I mean, the damsel in distress is a shining example. I'm doing a whole series about Princess Zelda right now, on and off, and how she's actually not a damsel in distress at all. But even if she was, sometimes the innocent kidnapped by evil person is not necessarily a bad thing for women. Is that enough of an answer? I don't want to eat up too much time on this.
Oh no, you're totally fine. I think, well, I'm fine going wherever you want to go with this. I know we do have a
Okay.
list of questions, but you did say that you have to wrap things up by around 9 EST, right?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
Uh,
so I mean,
Good.
basically where I came into Gamergate was the idea that, yes, we need more women in gaming. Why? Because it's good for games. If women make games, if women play games, ultimately around that point, the male consumer base, the white male consumer base for gaming was saturated. But also, if you look at, say, Black men, Black people in general, a greater percentage of Black Americans play games than percentage of white Americans. So, the male demographic's pretty saturated. In order for gaming to grow, we need to bring in more people, different types of people. And no game is for everybody. The diversity's good, and the single viewpoint isn't great, which is probably why I ended up taking a very different position on GamerGate than almost everybody else with my sort of top line description, right? I came from not only music journalism before I was a games journalist, but also talk radio, so hard news. So I had a different ethic. I know that's a loaded term in this particular subject, but I had a different understanding of journalistic ethics than a lot of people in the gaming space, because my background was, you don't judge when you're reporting. If there's a side of the story, you go and talk to them. You don't have to agree to them. You do have to do the interview, and you have to do it fairly. So the whole idea of, deplatforming, it really caught me off guard. I admit, I suddenly felt like whole the whole earth shifted under my feet suddenly back in, what was it, 2014 that it started?
Yeah, 2014.
Yeah. So that was, um it was interesting. It was interesting to be right ground zero for that whole thing, and to watch it evolve, and watch it kind of take on a life of its own, and facts kind of going bye-bye very, very quickly, in my opinion.
And it's interesting you bring up you brought this up a couple times, that there's this one idea
Hmm.
that some of the people who were around back then, and perhaps who are around today, they believed that there's one true idea, and that their idea is the only right way to look at video games, the only right way to look at
Right.
gamers, the only right way to look at games, um, Gamergate, really, and they wouldn't allow opposing viewpoints. And I bring this up with people, especially people who weren't around back during Gamergate, like Ninetales,
Hmm.
and I I don't know if it's sort of like you had to have been there and seen it all happen, because I think this is a huge problem. I think that I want to live in a pluralistic society. I want to see your vision of what video games can be like. I
Right.
want to see Annie Sarkeesian's vision. I want to see my own vision. I want to see Troy Levitt's vision. I want to see all these different types of games being made, and people can decide for themselves what they want to play, what they want to talk about, what they want to spend their money on.
Hmm.
Um, but back then it wasn't like that. There was this shutting down of the discussion. I think that's an underappreciated aspect of it. And people who weren't around back in that time period, they're like, "Really? Did that really happen?" It's like, "Yeah, it really did."
Yeah, it was I mean, if you only got your opinion of Gamergate from, the news articles that came out about it, you'd have a very different opinion than if you watched it happen. And watching it happen, it shifted about 3 or 4 times, in terms of what it was about and who it was about, and the idea that it was about one thing at all is inaccurate. It's one of those stories that I think, is important to sort of chronicle, and maybe take another look at 10 years later, because it's really hard to trust the media when the media is the story. And from a reporting standpoint, I had to bow out, because I couldn't be objective, because Milo Yiannopoulos went right at me and said I got my tits out for a living. He was a real journalist. Don't tell him how to do his job. And at that point, I'm like, well, crap. I can't just report this anymore. Now I'm part of the damn story. And that's when things got, well, between that and what happened with the one Polygon article I've done in my entire life, that made me part of the story. And that was understatement of the century, weird.
Yeah, obviously, look, Milo's an asshole. I think I probably criticized him at the time for saying that about you, if I knew about it.
Yeah, I mean, what was funny is how divisive that whole thing was. And at first I thought, oh my God, this is nobody's going to take this seriously, right? And that's when that was my first glimpse of maybe, there's a bunch of different people out for a bunch of different things with a bunch of different priorities here, and they're all getting lumped together because it was pretty much 50-50 on, on the pro Gamergate side, and the anti Gamergate side was kind of going, well, you shouldn't have stuck your finger in the light socket anyway. I'm paraphrasing there, but the general consensus was, especially after the Polygon article came out, which I wrote one freelance piece for Polygon, and it was actually a rebuttal of a staff writer at Polygon writing an article about mental health being a villain in games. And I basically said to them, look, there's another side to this. And that was before Gamergate kicked off. We started negotiations into this stuff. I'd actually submitted the piece weeks before everything exploded, and I thought they'd forgotten about it. I thought, okay, they said they were going to publish it. They didn't, whatever. I'm just going to get on with things. And it was like 72 hours or something like that. I'm going to be off on times, but I just done Sargon of Akkad stream. Because my attitude is, yeah, I'll talk to people. But I just done Sargon stream and I get the email saying, we're running the piece like tomorrow or something like that. And I knew I was screwed at that moment. I knew how it was going to look. I knew people weren't going to believe me, and it was, I was getting 508 hateful messages an hour, and it took, the response from Polygon is, if you're going to respond to these people, don't tag us. So big defenders of women right there. Full disclosure, I may be off on specific times or anything like that. It's almost 10 years ago. So, but that was sort of my first, and then it took 2 weeks for anyone to even reach out after that, just hammering. And you can't say you support women and want more women in gaming when you throw a freelancer to the wolves like that. That was just, to put it lightly, not cool on Polygon's part. And that was the pattern I found in the journalism side of the industry. The devs are much better, don't get me wrong. But from the journalism standpoint, they were real happy to say we support women. Following through on that actively, not so much.
So you say you said or mentioned the Gamergate thing was 50-50. 50-50 what exactly?
Well, 50-50 people who was like, yeah, get her, Milo, get that whore. Because I've done pinup modeling. I was on a TV show in Canada. It's called Ed and Red's Night Party. So, there's pictures of me out there in a chainmail bikini and cosplaying Frank Cho characters. That's a comic book artist who tends to do cheesecakey things. And so Milo, because Milo's Milo, decided to take a swipe at that. And what I found interesting was not the people who were cheering him on, because that was expected from like the worst harassers on the internet, the misogynist shitlord type. It was the people who were going, whoa, not cool. And I mean, that alone showed me that this was not a hive mind. This was not just about whatever you want to call it. I'm careful about, isms, but this wasn't just about people looking to kick at women. There were people that didn't support that. And, you know, people can take that for what it's worth. It happened. Not everybody agreed with him. I think that's an important thing to know. There were some people there who sincerely were actually interested to make sure that games were fair and were being reported on fairly, and there wasn't, politicking behind the scenes. And I think that the mistake the press and the industry made. Now, I'm going to be kinder to the industry as a whole than the press for reasons we can get into. But I think the mistake in responding to the early days of Gamergate was centering the harassers instead of the people who had sincere concerns. The fact that all the attention got poured into the bad actors instead of going, look, we're not talking to you. We want to talk to the people who are actually coming to the table fairly. We're going to center you. We're going to normalize you. We're not going to center the jerks. The industry did the exact opposite, and that's not best practices. That's against everything we know worked. And I can't for the life of me to this day understand why things went that way.
Yeah, there were definitely bad actors. I really I think would disagree strongly with this idea that I was 50-50. I don't think my research has borne that out.
Oh, I'm
Um,
talking that one tweet, that one Twitter exchange. That's all I'm talking
okay.
about. It was like 50% supportive, 50% not. And with any of this stuff, um we don't know how many of those were authentic users. It was Twitter. How much of those were third-party trolls and, Twitter breaks. So I didn't see everything. The exact numbers are it's really hard to determine. The point is there were a sizable amount of people who were not good with, and you saw this again and again and again, people from Gamergate going, don't harass, don't harass, don't harass. No, we don't want this. And that getting completely ignored in a lot of the coverage.
Yeah, and well, it's interesting too because I've gone through like the FBI report on Gamergate
Mhm.
and the Women Action Media study and the Newsweek slash Brandwatch study, and I've basically come to the conclusion um, that they're I can't find a single example of a confirmed Gamergate person actually engaging in the legal definition of harassment. Now, like mean tweets and stuff like that, like did see people send mean tweets? Probably, absolutely. It's the internet. You're gonna have,
Well,
but
in my
the legal
case,
definition, I don't think any.
emails came out where there was conspiring to get me to kill myself. And there's that one email from Milo going, I didn't tell anybody to muck around in her personal life. And this was after the Ralph retort ran a story labeled parody, where they claimed I was raped by my uncle and was a former stripper and all this stuff. And, the fact that Milo, of all people, believed that was a bit interesting, but it was funny because a lot of the gamer gators were like, if you used to be a stripper, I think you would have told us. And it's like, yeah, I totally would. That actually would have been, a resume item for me, considering what I do. So there was some, and whether you want to consider the Ralph retort actual core Gamergate, because I know they were kicked out at some point. That's, I mean, you know, again, it's tough to define, and there's different laws, right? What's considered, I mean, look at the Jonathan Majors thing. If you read that New York law, harassment is just annoying someone. So the legal definition of harassment changes from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. I think it's not productive to try to make everything try to create a unified theory of Gamergate, because it was actually a bunch of different groups that all got bundled into this one thing. I mean, Kiwi Farms, obviously, Kiwi Farms is Kiwi Farms, right? It is what it is. 4chan was 4chan. And a big backdrop to GamerGate
Kiwi
was
Farms
the
wasn't
something awful
GamerGate though.
fortune.
They,
No,
yeah, to be
no,
clear,
but the
for
one
the
of
book.
one of the one of the jokes about that whole thing is they're like, wow, you actually have a positive reference on Kiwi Farms because all they called me was a prostitute. But that's just basically anybody in the media, right? Like they went fairly easy on me, all things concerned. And it just there was some not great stuff that happened. The thing is, it was happening on both major sides. You know, there was a lot of vengeance and a lot of retaliation and a lot of the amazing thing is that unlike other situations that blow up on the internet, no one was no one was harmed, which when you think about how long it went and like no one was physically harmed. And when you think about how long it went and how hot that ran and the issues that were involved in it, that says something. I mean, if you even look what's going on with some of the quote unquote protests now, people are getting beat up and buildings are being vandalized. So putting it in perspective, in terms of these things, I hesitate to say Gamergate was pretty well behaved because that'll be misconstrued, but it was the threat assessment was way exaggerated. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. Especially, and so, well, I guess it might be useful for us to define harassment. So, like, I used to have this stuff in it. Well, I don't know. It's probably shifted over time. But, like, I think now my definition of harassment, I'm torn between two different definitions. One is the legal definition, and that might change from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, like you said. Different states have different laws. But,
Yeah.
like, something along the lines of, like death threats, like that's harassment, for sure. Like
Yeah,
we
I
and
mean,
bomb threats into events, like that's harassment for sure. Those are like real
right. I
crimes that
mean,
people are.
the criminal code wording is yeah, sorry, we had a bit of a connection disruption there. Where I live, the definition is engaging in a course of vexatious comment or conduct that is known or ought reasonably to be known to be unwelcome. And I mean, that can mean almost anything, right?
Vexatious.
Vexatious. Yeah. Like vexing you, vexatious. That is the human rights code definition. The definition of criminal harassment is repeatedly following from place to place the other person or anyone known to them, repeatedly communicating with either directly or indirectly the person or anyone known to them, besetting or watching the dwelling, house, or place where the other person or anyone known to them resides, works, carries business, or engaging in threatening conduct directed at the other person or any member of their family. So it's deliberate or recklessly, and you know that came up very pointedly in the Jonathan Majors trial, the reckless part of it. So depending on how you parse it, depending on who's doing the analysis, you can get a technical definition of harassment. But again, we all saw the SPJ um uh, thing, the talk, get a bomb threat. So, like I said, it went both ways. Like that bomb threat stuff like that, that is definitely harassment.
Yeah, I would agree, and so would I would say so was the ones that Anita Sarkeesian received at her college. Um, Not
Yes.
at her college, but at the college she was going to speak at. That
Yeah,
definitely
the
is harassment.
yeah. I
Though
mean, that's
some of
more than
those
harassment when you're
threats,
making a threat. Yeah.
there were like three threats, and like two of them were very obvious jokes. Like the one that said they had over 9,000 bombs, and the one
E-
like that. Like, look, they it's probably still illegal. They shouldn't have done that for sure, and it's wrong. But like, I don't know how seriously we want to take like. I I, I think it's better just to say, look, that's harassment and just move on. I think that's like the better approach. But like, I probably the person was just fucking around.
this is a
And we
very
don't know it was a
difficult
GamerGate person,
thing.
to be clear. I just want to specify.
Yes, exactly. One, didn't some of them come out and actually say they were just trolling because the whole thing was absurd? That
At
was in the
least
FBI
several.
report.
Well, yeah, one of
Yeah.
them was the miner who they actually went to, or I don't know if he was a miner specifically. It's a bit implied that he was. They went to his
Mm-hmm.
house, and the FBI did actually talk to him, and he apologized. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't think he had any
And
known connection with GamerGate. And then I've actually interviewed two of the trolls. Do you remember Pterodax or Avius?
yes. Yeah.
So I've interviewed Pterodax. He obviously he was an agent of chaos. He went after everybody.
Yeah.
Um, and Avius, he was a right wing troll. He was very
Mm-hmm.
much like, but he didn't even know what GamerGate was. He thought that the social justice warriors, quote unquote, he thought that they were bad people, and so he
Right.
didn't like them, and so he just tweeted a bunch of mean stuff at them.
Yeah, and when you're in the public eye, you have far too many conversations about whether a threat is credible. And there actually is a certain metric that the police use. And again, America's very different from many parts of Canada in this regard. It seems like in the US you can get the cops to come out for anything. In Canada, it's a bit um it's a bit different. Uh but yeah, like I said, I think part of the problem is getting bogged down in these arguments of definition, because when you've got so many people having so many opinions about the same general, 3 to 5 subjects, of course some people are going to go over the line if we judge an entire movement, any movement, by the absolute worst, garbage fires, eh, who have that opinion. No opinion is valid. We have to take the median as the mainstream, not the worst extremes. Does that make sense?
No, for sure. And I do want to, I was going to say, I was torn between the legal definition and just
Yeah.
sticking with that. And I was also, the other one, which is the position I held and probably still hold, is that
Mm,
harassment is whenever it crosses over from the internet into real life. So, like trying to get somebody fired from their job with a social media campaign, I'd say that that's a form of harassment. Um, or like doxing somebody, that's a form of harassment. I would say that those are things that they might not technically meet the legal definition, but like I think that they're pretty bad behavior, and I think that like, it probably should be condemned in society.
right, right. And bad behavior is probably just a better catch-all than harassment, because one of the things that's so frustrating in these big internet phenomenon is that things do become clobber phrases. We saw the exact same thing happen with, the Johnny Depp Amber Heard thing, that they just got a narrative and they ignored anything that didn't fit that narrative and just hammered on everything that did. And the idea of who was harassing who and how much is, the fair criticism became a loaded statement during Gamergate. And that particular thing, it's very hard to figure out where the line is, you know? What is fair criticism and what is just a personal attack? And even regarding personal attacks, what do we collectively agree is allowable? We've never really had that conversation in the gaming space because all the responses have been so reactive. And we see that to this day with, some of the stuff that's going on Nexus mods and, various online communities. It's still a mess. People haven't totally got this figured out.
Now, some people might be reading this book or watching this stream,
Mhm.
and they might think, well, I've seen what Anita Sarkeesian's feminist critique is. I disagree with a lot of it,
Mhm.
and I just want to play a bunch of video games. Why do we need to have, in your view, right, a good
Yeah.
feminist critique to come in and present an alternative feminist viewpoint? Why is that necessary or good for the gaming industry as a whole?
Well, it's exactly what you said, a diversity of viewpoint, right? We need to figure this stuff out because developers need to be able to have the license to have people doing bad things in games. Because part of the fun of games is exploring the idea of good and evil. Our choices and reactions to certain scenarios set up in games can be powerful and a lot of fun. And so what I do is, instead of go this good, this bad, I go, okay, can you defend this? Are you actually thinking about this instead of just replicating a bunch of things that may or may not be well thought out? And one of the things I'm really big on is something called benevolent sexism. It's this, in the short term, it puts women up on pedestals. But what that means is, in the longer term, we have farther to fall when we do something that violates some social norm. And that's the big one in gaming, because a lot of gamers are not what we consider sex typical. Men and the women. Men tend to be more, gamer. The definition of a gamer is constantly in flux. But a guy who's really big in Undertale might be more introverted, more sensitive, less sports jock than somebody who's going to play Madden, right? And we need space for all of that. And when we examine gender, it has to be done holistically, not just the depiction of women, because that's too big a category, not just the depiction of men, because that's too big a category. What are some underexplored aspects of these experiences so that we can continue to tell interesting stories instead of seeing, what's gone on in, say, some of these big universes where they stagnate and then it's like, oh, there's no new stories. No, there's an infinite number of stories as long as we really understand the structure and the fundamentals. And I even came up with, for my teaching, my own kind of lens on the whole thing. Because the thing that makes games special is we both watch cutscenes that we can't control, but we also play. We actually add inputs, and that is a form of performance. And so gender presentation, gender performance, because there's gender signifiers and then there's gender performance. And games do both. So I actually, when I do talks, I break down the idea of the male gaze. I'm sure everybody's heard of that. I can hear the eye rolling in advance now. But I break that down and go, does this really apply to games? No, because you're not just a passive participant to what you're looking at. You can control the camera, you can control the character, you can customize your avatar. We can break that. And I use a tool called the performative gamer gaze, which means gamers read certain signifiers and systems in games differently than a casual player or somebody who's never played a video game. That matters, but also play matters. The fact that we are interacting with things mean what certain signifiers mean is radically different than if you're just sitting there watching it. And I know that was really dense, so I'll pause there in case you have any questions.
So, does the interactive element that changes the way we should look at it from, say, a movie or a book?
Absolutely. And I'll give you an example using something I really disagreed with from Feminist Frequency's analysis. Do you remember when they went after the way the female, I think it was the Vanguards in Destiny, were animated? That they had a very feminine kind of, swishy, sit in side saddle, a very feminine, clearly feminine gender performance. Do you remember that?
No, but I'll be honest, I've not seen all of her videos. I've seen some. I even responded to a couple of them back in the, well, one of them back in the day.
All right. Okay.
Her exotic feminist, or not your exotic fantasy video, I responded to.
Right. Right. And I mean, that one hit me kind of hard because I'm a ginger. There's a ton of stereotypes about us. But so the idea of, well, why do all women in a game have to perform traditionally feminine? Well, in terms of media representation, when it's linear, okay, fair. And you know what? Fair no matter what. But when someone is customizing a character and they want to have that experience, we need that traditional femininity so that the player can select from it. Because even if a player doesn't choose that, the act of being able to choose and not choosing it is meaningful. If everybody's just shoehorned into a sort of default masculine movement pattern because we think femi hand gestures are somehow bad for women, well, we're erasing the feminine and calling it feminist, and that makes zero sense.
So, do you think if you have something like Final Fantasy 14 as a game that has a bust slider in it, and you can
Yeah,
choose your character's bust size, do you think that something like that promotes the idea that women are objects?
no. Not in and of itself. Now, I'm biased on this one. God slipped on the bus slider when I was created. I got the Lara Croft treatment. And I mean, one of the things that I take exception to is this idea that women built like me aren't real. I actually cosplay Ivy Valentine. Just was like, no, no, you are wrong. Let's not do that. Creating, offering a tool is not making a commentary on a state. And I know this is really esoteric, but so if I have to break anything down, just let me know. But the problem with a lot of this analysis, feminist, intersectionalist, all that stuff, is that it separates choices into moral and immoral. The mistake it makes is that it doesn't hold the option for an amoral action. So something that is not actively against morals, something that is not actually pro-moral, it is just a neutral state. And things like, you know, breast sliders to me factor in, into that amoral element. And it really depends, right, on the game. If you're doing a realistic military shooter, then yeah, having people with like triple J cups running around practically smacking themselves in the face on the battlefield, probably not the wisest design choice. But if you're playing a fantasy thing where people are literally firing magic fireballs at each other, why not? Why not let people have the experience they want to have? But again, that's not a moral objection to the watermelon boobs in military shooters. That's an aesthetic one. That's an artistic one. And I think it's very, very important to separate moral design decisions from, aesthetic ones.
You said that the game development industry
Mhm.
is better at how they approach women than the games journalism industry. What do you mean?
Well, the devs, not the PR people, but the developers live in fear of their marketing departments and their PR departments. And a lot of them can't say what they really want to say because they have an acute awareness that one person on the team gets targeted, it affects the entire game. I mean, Hogwarts Legacy was a shining example of that. Poor Troy. You know, um, the in a team as big as AAA gaming is, there's gonna be somebody on it with an opinion you don't agree with. And they try very hard. Obviously, some are much more political than others. The indie games tend to be more monolithic than AAA. But there's somebody on your favorite game with some views you probably don't agree with and think might be kind of evil. just for sheer law of averages. And these game devs are very aware of that. But the ones I know, the ones I have spoken to are they they desperately really want more women in the industry just because they value that viewpoint. By the time you get to playtesting, you're so far along. If you've made some critical mistake, it might be too late to fix it. Whereas if you've got women, like Amy Henning, like Jade Raymond, early on in the development process, you don't just get a different view on women. You get a different view on men, and then, alien races like the Asari or the Hanar, these are both Mass Effect characters, that defy gender dimorphism. The Hanar just say calls each of them this one. The Asari are a monogender species. They all look like women to us, but if there's no men, you don't have women in a species, right? To get these different points of view is really, really important when you're creating fantasy. Because hey, what's one little twist we can put on a character and make it really cool? If everybody's had essentially the same experience on your team, you don't get those ideas. And devs are, I'd say they're thirsty for it, but that means something a little different in, in idiom. So, they really care. It, the thing that doesn't come across in the stuff you see at like the game awards or in these, tightly packaged presentations, because a lot of these guys don't have media training and they're nervous as anything. You don't see how much developers really, really care about making something that people are going to take joy out of. And they want everybody to be able to take joy in their products. They don't necessarily know how to do that, and they don't necessarily factor everyone into everyone. But one thing I've found with games and game dev that is very different from TV, definitely film, even things like radio, is that gaming, the process of making games, is much more collaborative than film or television, which tends to be top down. The director tells you to do something, you do it. Whereas in game dev, the creative director may not, the creative director is likely not a tool designer. And so the tool designer has to be able to say, look, we can do it this way, but here's a here's a better way that will work with what the engine is best at instead of a workaround for a workaround. And a good creative director listens to that and says, tell me more. And that is what I love about the process of making games, how open everybody is to sharing, and that gets squashed by all these NDAs and PR people and marketing people saying say nothing, say nothing. So I know that one of the things that developers want is more understanding in the public eye about what it takes to make games. And they just can't do it because they'll get fired. But, the stereotypes of the industry are not true. Yes, we had the scandals of the past. But even in that case, keep in mind these are massive companies. And it affects 100 people at a company that employs 5,000. Yeah, it's bad. We got to do something about that. But that also means there's 4,000 people, even if you factor in the people who had a bad experience and didn't come forward. There's 4,000 people that had an absolutely great experience. And this kind of context is not being presented in the coverage of the industry. And I know that was a really long answer to a very simple question, but this stuff's not simple.
I'm glad you brought up Mass Effect because that's actually a really good example. I didn't really think about it that way necessarily, but this is something that basically couldn't be made if you had everybody on the team thinking who thought exactly the same way. It really
Right.
required diversity, right? It required diversity of thought amongst the creators. That you have like the Asari, who are like a very unique species, or the Hanar, or the Elcor, or like all these different and they because they
Yeah.
had like all these different writers. and developers, they were able to create a story that was like super well fleshed out and had like a lot of diversity in these different species that they were creating,
Hmm.
and that was really amazing. And you couldn't do that if everybody in that room was like Anita Sarkeesian, or everybody in that room was like me, or everybody in the room was like you, or everybody in that room was like whoever, right? You couldn't have
Yeah,
that.
I mean, we saw what happened with Andromeda when they clearly got spooked and started having. I dropped Andromeda when a Krogan started lecturing me about environmental protection. It's like, this is not why I play games with alien races. I want the race where a headbutt is polite, because it's all about science fiction. To me, is all about stepping away from our norms so that we can question our norms. And I mean, you do see that starting to slip. That, how do I put this? We're not allowed to offer, I shouldn't say that, because it's starting to come back. We're starting to get challenging content back, but it's going to take a while to get back to, the pre-feminist frequency levels of experimentation. And what I hope is that we can just learn and pick up from it, and not just have a backlash where all of the bad stuff comes back and no good add-ons are done. And right now, I'm seeing a real deficit where female representation is concerned, and it's discouraging to me, because if women aren't allowed to be sexy, women aren't allowed to be whole people. Men are allowed to be sexy. I mean, everybody's freaking out about Asterion and Baldur's Gate. It's just lust with a lot of these fangirls. Women deserve to be able to have a full spectrum of human experience too. And the thing that feminist frequency crushed for a while, I don't think they intended to, but this was their impact, is that the depictions of women have actually narrowed instead of broadened. And again, I don't think that that was the intended result, but that was the result in real terms.
Okay, there's I got a whole bunch of notes about things I want to explore from here.
All right.
Um, but I guess I'll start with a relatively light one. So I've played Mass Effect Andromeda a little bit. I actually never beat the game. It's not as good as the trilogy, that's for sure.
Mm-mm.
And I couldn't get sucked into it as much. I made it to where you make it to the space station, the first space station or whatever.
Right.
Um, but I was just like running around. I'm like, okay, it didn't have the love in it, and I was plan on going back, but haven't yet. Anyway, the Krogan. So I don't know how badly they handled this. They probably handled it pretty bad. The Krogan environmentalist. But when you're creating like a fictional species, you're probably the developers, I'm sure, and this goes for like people who make TV shows like Star Trek or whatever too. They
Hmm.
probably like there's probably something where they're divided, they're torn on because on one hand they want to like create this culture and this unique culture like the Bajorans or the Krogan or whatever it happens to be.
Hmm.
But at the same time, they don't want to portray them necessarily as being like a monoculture where it's like, oh, every single Krogan
Right.
thinks exactly the same way. How do you handle something like that? And could you have like a character who's a Krogan who is like an environmental protection person?
Well, what they tried to do was show that the Krogans were assimilated by, the Mass Effect version of the Federation. And so they'd become sort of politically correct, for lack of a better term. And I mean, we would consider that nowadays cultural destruction. And that's just a world building mistake when you think about it, because the whole reason the Krogans were so wild is that more advanced societies gave them weapons beyond their society's ability to handle responsibly, to make them shock troopers against the Rachni, those spider giant spider creatures in Mass Effect. And so the whole idea was that it was sort of a Star Trek violating the Prime Directive thing. you mucked with something you shouldn't muck with, and now you have to solve for that problem. And so it's all about the purpose in the in the story. If you want, every culture has norms. So you have to decide what's the norm, how do various individuals deviate from the norm, and what degree of tolerance for eccentricity a culture has. So the Solarians, for example, as a scientist race, or the Asari as a monogendered species, are obviously going to have much more um a much more lax attitude towards norms than, say, the Krogan, which are much more warlike and, primitive, air quotes, but much more about survival. And races based on survival tend to have much more rigid norms than ones that are relatively affluent and spend a lot of time thinky. But it's all about what you want it to do, and the purpose of the race in the culture. The cool thing about the Krogan, the cool thing about the Qunari, or the Klingons in Star Trek, is that they are very foreign. They read as human to us, but culturally they are not like us. And when you create a race based on that, sure, you can absolutely have exceptions. You just have to think about what the culture would do to those exceptions. And a lot, both the Mass Effect and Dragon Age teams, especially the Dragon Age team, pulled from real historical cultures to provide a baseline for that. And when you study gender, it's fascinating to see how various cultures on the world handle things like, what do you do with a person who is infertile in a culture that practices ancestor worship? Well, certain cultures around the world have decided, well, okay, in that case, they have to have ancestors or their immortal soul is going to die, or they have to have descendants, so their immortal soul is going to die. So someone will have a child in their name. And for the purposes of a culture, they are their parents. So basically, it's a form of surrogacy to protect someone's immortal soul. They don't just kick the person out of the culture. So different cultures deal with social cohesion in different ways, and being very what's good for women and what's good for men really damages the ability to world build that way, because men and women don't mean the same thing to every culture.
You said that the types of female characters you can make in games today and the types of like
Hmm.
stories of women's stories you can tell has narrowed instead of broadened.
Yep.
What do you think is the cause of this? What do you think can be done about it? Can you actually, well, actually first, sorry, I'm going all over the place. Can you convince the audience and convince me that that's true, or try to?
Think about how many playable characters in games are what I call the brown hair McPonytail. Athletically built, B cup brunette, usually with a ponytail. They have turned Lara Croft into that. The no, sorry, there's three playable characters. No, only two. You don't play Casey. Saga in Alan Wake 2, brown hair McPonytail. The default character in Saints Row, brown hair McPonytail. Just Ellie, brown hair McPonytail. The only human-looking woman in Baldur's Gate 3 that's a companion, brown hair McPonytail. We're talking Shadowheart. Her hair's black, but still. There is definitely, occasionally you get somebody like Aloy from Horizon Forbidden West, but in the West, and this is a commentary exclusively on Western games. The Japanese are still going Bob's your uncle on it. But in the West, it has become much more, this is the only acceptable non-exoticized, non-problematic type of heroine. If you even look at uh superhero stuff, like all the Star Wars women, brown hair, the Hunger Games, brown hair, the different Marvel, race swap things tend to have brown hair. Even Black Widow was blonde in one movie. There's definitely something going on here. And it obviously does not 100%, but there is definitely a trend in AAA Western games where if you want to be safe, it's sort of this, could she be Hispanic? Could she be mixed race? Could she, well, let's make Schrodinger's minority and slap her on a box art.
Yeah, I mean, I have not studied the topic and I don't play a whole lot of new games, but this phenomenon you've mentioned, it seems to be very real. And like, I guess that's because they want to be seen as progressive, but also safe. They don't want to be accused of doing it badly by people who are more inclined to care about diversity, and they don't. Well, that's basically I think the main group that they really care about not pissing off.
And the interesting thing is that women are not bothered by beautiful women in media, provided you diversify who is allowed to be beautiful in your media. I mean, think about the cover of most women's magazines. There's beautiful women on the cover, right? We don't put men on the cover of women's magazines.
So, do you think that game developers are afraid to make the games that they want because and if so, why?
I don't think it's fear. They're actively told you can't do it. I've heard that from some people that certain games they wanted to have a default, just nope, this is the female main character. Um and they said you can't do it. You have to have it a male or female option because there's still this belief that, men don't want to play as women in games, which we also know isn't true. It's
I love playing
true.
female characters.
Yeah, it's true of junior high school boys. Once you get to high school, men don't care. Males don't care.
They might
We
prefer
know
it.
this. Well, a bunch of friends of mine are like, if I got to stare at somebody's ass an entire game, it might as well be one I like. Which, okay, that's one way to make a decision. I like it. It it is this persistent myth, and nobody wants to be told they're a bad person, right? And I think there is a lot of decision making that is just, please don't scream at us. There is also this idea, and people get kind of upset when I bring this up, but there's this stereotype of women as destroyers of fun and these sort of jealous, you know, oh, you like that? Well, that's going to get a guy in trouble. And whenever I make a Saints Row character, I make her look like Nicki Minaj or Megan Thee Stallion. I mean, that's what I want to play in that game. Same with Grand Theft Auto. So it for the multiplayer. So it's one of those things that we make a lot of assumptions and no one tests. And even when we do test, we have data, they ignore it because it's just that part of our brains that say stay in the cave. If you take a risk and people get mad at you, well, then you risk getting fired. If you stay where it's safe, then you feel repressed, but you keep your job. And a lot of people in these game studios, they have kids, they have a family, and having to start a new company might mean a massive relocation, and they just don't want to risk that. And so they play it safe. Like I said, I don't blame them. I completely understand these choices where, the Japanese are just like, we're going to do whatever we want because the norms, the expectations, the discourse is completely different over there.
And there's something that one of the people I've interviewed, Silverwolf CC, Um,
Mhm.
she talks about this. I'm not objectifying her. She says that she's a well-endowed woman, and she likes to see other well-endowed women in games. Um, but that it seems like even having a character with like still within the realm of realism, but large
Mhm.
breasts is very much frowned upon now.
Yeah, this is where we get into the idea of, well, someone would like that wouldn't look like that. It'd get in the way. And it's weird to me that games like Mortal Kombat started dropping the word respectful in terms of the female characters' outfits. Of course, they nerf the character costumes only to make you pay extra for the costumes that you remember and love and want. So, all right, maybe that was a corporate move. But in a game where you're ripping people's spines out, you do an X-ray move where you have shattered 3 vertebrae and then they get up and just shake it off. Like, why not have gravity defying physics? Like, why not just go over the top with everything? Why does one thing have to be realistic or respectful? Like, why does sex have these limiters in a game where it's over the top brutal violence? Now, part of that is because of the DC connection with the license. And part of that is Warner going, "Don't you dare," in some cases. But yeah, it doesn't make sense. I'm the same way. I like to see a diversity of body types. I like to see different types of beauty in the same space. And this idea that there's only one acceptable female silhouette at any given time is a problem.
So I'm gonna play devil's advocate here.
Yeah,
So Tomb Raider, obviously Lara Croft, she wore skimpy outfits. She was
right.
kind of a sex symbol in some ways. Very well endowed character. And a lot of people, well, I don't know about a lot of people. Some people were like, "Oh, well, look at this. She's just like a sex object for the male gaze. She's not a real character in her own right." And like the game developers, I guess, took this to heart and were like, "Okay, we're going to redesign her character for the newer games, and we're not going to have her be as much of a sexually appealing person. Well, she's still attractive. I mean, like,
Right.
and I think the new Tomb Raider game. Well, I don't know about the new one, but like the one from whatever it was, 2016, the first of the reboot. I thought that that was like an okay, pretty good game. And I thought that the character was like interesting like they did like an okay job. But it obviously there's very real differences between her new design and the original
Mhm.
design. Wouldn't some of the people be like, look, the video games have grown up. You can't really have this this major franchise that millions of people are playing. That's supposed to be like kind of serious, right? She is like an archaeologist or a Tomb Raider, I guess technically, not really an archaeologist. Um,
Right.
eh,
Which makes her a criminal, let's keep that in mind.
yeah, I mean, yeah, right. She's not
Yeah,
really Indiana Jones here, though Indiana Jones
right.
probably broke some laws too. But
Oh, yeah, I mean, everything he did was essentially appropriating other people's cultures, but the thing about Indiana Jones is he never actually made it out with the relic. So, technically no laws were broken. The Holy Grail stayed where it was. The Ark of the Covenant got repossessed by the government somewhere. So, then again, the Indiana Jones films are set between, the 1930s and the 1960s. So it was a different time they're set in as well.
yeah, so if they want to portray her in like a very serious, more serious way, and they think that okay, it was kind of childish to have her running around in the skimpy outfit. It was kind of childish to have her have these large breasts. Let's just let's just play it safe, I guess, essentially, and make her a more quote unquote realistic character. Um, is that fine?
What is realistic about a Tomb Raider game? Like statues come to life and she's murdering guys with an ice pick and you're worried about her being modestly dressed and not so ample bosomed. It's a very weird mindset. I think you're right. That's the thinking. But when you actually break it down, in the original Tomb Raider, she was doing front walkovers on wet ledges. They took that away too. And a lot of the people playing the games now um, weren't aware of the classic Lara Croft story that really got cemented when it switched from core to crystal dynamics. That idea that Lara always she got the answers she was looking for, but it came at a great personal cost. There's so much more to that character than the way she looked, but also Lara Croft, her reference models, the women she was based on, were also, I mean, Nina Cherry was one of them. She was not based all on white girls, and they have actually made Lara whiter than she was originally intended. If you put it that way, it's like, well, that's not good. Her original name was Lara Cruz in development. Cruz. That's Latina. They keep stripping anything potentially intimidating or threatening out of these characters, and that's when I start going, you're still falling into this stereotype of action female heroes needing to be nice, and they primarily need to make people comfortable, and male heroes do not have to do that. And that's when we get into gender analysis again. What are we saying? What messages are we sending to people of all ages, but especially young men and women, about those norms, about what a good girl is, about what a bad girl is, about how we treat women who are not accommodating and nice? This stuff matters when we want, say, a woman to become a physicist or a business leader, where sometimes you have to not be nice, and sometimes you have to upset people, and sometimes, yes, you have to get aggressive. If not being nice is never okay, we wonder why women don't go into these programs. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, have you seen Blade Runner 2049, the sequel to Blade Runner?
Yes. Yeah.
I think that the I don't want to spoil anything for someone who hasn't seen it, so I'll be kind of vague. But the female, all right, fuck it, I don't care. It's been out for several years. Uh,
Yeah.
turn away if you don't want to be spoiled.
Spoiler.
But the character played by Sylvia Hoeks,
Yeah.
the main like bad person,
Yeah.
she's technically an android, but she's obviously female presenting
Yeah.
and
Replicant. Yeah.
rare replicant,
Yeah.
and one of the most like
Yeah.
terrifying characters
Yep.
I've ever seen in my, like I was like on the edge of my seat almost, like holy shit, like when she's like hunting down um I forget the main character's name, uh Ryan Gosling's character, I think it was, when she's hunting him
Yeah.
down and Harrison Ford, like oh my god, like she's actually terrifying as a character and very
Yep.
well done, and like she's obviously a very aggressive and like intelligent person who's like able to manipulate people, and like a very well done female character who's not like the nice, who breaks from like the stereotype that you're supposed to have now, where it's like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
they have to be the good character. You can't have bad female characters. Bad in terms of their morality, I mean, not in terms of like
Mm-hmm.
their writing.
Yeah. I mean, look at uh any of the female antagonists in the John Wick films. You can say the same thing. Lena Headey's character in the Carl Urban Doom movie. Cara Dune in The Mandalorian before, but there's a shining example, right? Gina Carano she did not play nice girls. And because some of her personal opinions were considered too spicy, she got let go. Meanwhile, Bill Burr, same show, he's had some spicy takes. His job wasn't threatened. This is what happens when we force women into be nice or else, even when Even when it's not your job to be nice, you still have to be nice. I had female vice presidents in media companies I've worked for tell me you have to let men think it's their idea for anything to get your ideas through. Yeah, but what happens then? When it comes time to be promoted, they promote the guy who thought it was his idea and everybody thought was his idea. It's so messed up what we do to girls. And this, oh, be non-threatening, oh, don't upset anybody, oh, be nice, be kind at all times, even when you're not supposed to be. This idea of this is where the benevolent sexism comes in, because there's this idea of a morality boost that women get in politics, in that female candidates are presumed to be more honest until they're caught fudging something once. And then that's it. They never get that back. Look at Elizabeth Warren with the whole, Native American ancestry thing.
Well, yeah,
It,
but to be
yeah.
clear, I don't. She does deserve to be criticized for that.
Criticized,
And but
yeah.
she also like she probably should have just owned up to it and been like, hey, look, I was actually probably mistaken about this. I was told this story when I was growing up that I had a Native American ancestor. Turns out it might not be true. My bad. Right? That's all she had to say. But said she never really owned up to her mistake.
I understand she did eventually come around to saying
Or
pretty
maybe she
much
did.
that.
Maybe she did
Yeah.
later on. Yeah,
Yeah,
maybe she did.
but that's the thing, right? Trump says a whole bunch of things that aren't true. George Santos lied about pretty much everything, and it was really hard to get that guy out. There is a gap, and it does come down to expectations, what we expect of men versus what we expect of women, and there is no magic thing in women that makes women inherently more moral or more caring. These are all stereotypes. And if we can't even have, Lara Croft, somebody who, if you think about it, in the new games, she's actually a lot more violent in the old games because she's killing dudes with an ice pick. That's a pretty brutal way to go. Bows and arrows are pretty savage. And again, they model her. If you look at female archers, they don't look the way they depict her in those games. Their back muscles are massive. And so they made a character look more traditionally likable or less threatening, not realistic. And that's where we have to be really careful of, is this realism really realism? And is realism as an appropriate design choice here, considering the other subject matter in the game? Does it make more sense to signify the way Horizon Zero Dawn did, that something is not totally explainable here? There were all those criticisms about Aloy being a redheaded, what they said was indigenous person, but it wasn't actually the case. She's a Bronze Age, like a throwback to the Bronze Age character. And it turns out the reason she's, yes, not the expected look for someone in that role is because, spoiler, hopefully played the game, it's been out a while, she's a clone of the scientists that did the whole program. So there are reasons to make a different choice. I do think that there's a fundamental weirdness of the design direction in Tomb Raider, is that the devs want people to feel protective of Lara Croft, and I have no idea why nobody wants an action hero avatar that needs saving by the player. That's just not the way gamers interact with action heroes, right? You want to be a badass in the game, give me a badass to control, because most of us don't have this physicality in real life. And so they keep going back to that. If we want her to be likable, we want people to feel protective. And I, I don't know if anybody wants to coddle an action hero. You know what I mean?
Well, I do want to talk about Troy Levitt and circle back to there.
Okay. Yep.
But I do. it's interesting. But before we do that, I guess I want to talk about this too, because like there's it seems like even like conservatives who obviously disagree with like the sex negative feminist people,
Right.
uh, or actually maybe not so much actually. Um, they
Depends on the type of
but
conservative,
like
right?
and obviously conservatives, it's not they're not there's not like one uniform conservative view, but like
Of course.
Ben Shapiro talks about, I see him say it a couple times at least, or at least one time. He said that he doesn't like female action heroes in movies um, because he doesn't think it's realistic. Because he doesn't think
Right.
like, well, this one woman is beating up like 25 guys. Um, and like I like female action heroes. I like aggressive women in general. In terms of
Right.
their personality, I like women who have a lot of confidence and are willing to stand up for themselves. Um, but he doesn't like this, and so it seems like even like a lot of conservatives are how what do we think of Ben Shapiro's critique? I guess I'll ask.
Somebody did a photo manip around the time that Ben Shapiro was freaking out about WAP, the Cardi B Megan the Stallion video, and somebody made a manip of the Sekiro Shadows Die Twice box cover and made it Shapiro has a dry wife. And I keep thinking about that every time he comes up. Let's face it, he's pushing the whole trad thing, right? He's pushing that kind of, and this is the weird Venn diagram, the horseshoe effect of the extreme right and the extreme left, right? They both agree boobs are scary and freak them out. And I wonder if they're protesting too much there. Or, he could just be closeted gay and doesn't know what's good. I have no proof of that. It's just an option. And it is interesting that the one thing parts of the left and parts of the right agree on is cover up and keep your legs closed, honey.
Though I will defend Ben Shapiro a bit here. I don't think he's far right. I I think he is probably like more of a like a center right guy. Though he does make a lot of excuses for Trump. Um, and he probably shouldn't do that. He also does criticize him sometimes, to be fair, but I wouldn't call him far right.
Well, in terms of his traditional attitudes on women. No, that
Well,
that's the
even
that's the
there, I
focus of the question here.
in regards to action movies, yeah, but like I don't think like in his personal life that like Ben Shapiro would not hire a woman. I think he has demonstrated that he is willing to hire women and give them important roles within his organization, and I don't think that he's like a sexist person.
I mean, his comments on the Barbie movie were see, I don't know how much of that is just for clicks and how much of it is he sincerely believes, but let's face it, guys like him, guys like left-wing pundits, they only hire people whose views match their own, or at least their views aren't threatening. And so that way, I do consider him more, farther away from the center because most center left, center right people have some friends who are on the, center of the other pole. Whereas, I mean, Ben Shapiro's whole deal is conservative media.
Yeah, he definitely has his opinions and biases, and I disagree with him on some stuff for sure. Like
Mhm.
I'm pretty like center left neoliberal, I guess.
Yeah.
Um, anyway, I want to get stuck on Ben. Troy Levitt, though, I interviewed
Mhm.
him, and I didn't talk about the Hogwarts Legacy controversy too much. I wish I would have now in retrospect, but um, that happened more like after Gamergate, quote unquote. That was a
Yeah.
pretty recent phenomena. So I didn't dive too deep into it, but he actually commented on one of my videos recently, like yesterday or 2 days ago. Um, and he talked about how Wired gave Hogwarts Legacy a 1 out of 10 review. And if you read the review, I've not read the full thing because it's not even that long really, but I just like looked it over. But like the first like at least like I don't know like 20 paragraphs or whatever, the whole thing is about how the artist, the reviewer, hates J.K. Rowling and feels betrayed by her on a personal level, and therefore like she just like bashes J.K. Rowling. And it's like, so wait, you gave the game a 1 out of 10 review because you don't like the author of the book that the game is based on, and
Right.
you're going to literally like harm this game developer and this game development studio's reputation and the people who work for it, including the lead developer Troy Levitt, and you're
Mhm.
going to harm them in their careers, and you're going to like basically mislead the reader into thinking it's like a terrible game just because you personally don't like J.K. Rowling or personally don't agree with her. Like that seems like it's really unethical, or at least maybe not unethical, but at the very least it's doing a disservice to both the art form of games,
Mhm.
and it's doing a disservice to the developers, and it's doing a disservice to the reader, the consumer.
Mhm. I mean, it's the same way people have suddenly turned on Neil Druckmann because he was born in West Bank. So all of a sudden, no, you can bash The Last of Us too, because he did some interviews where he said it was inspired by the kidnapping of Gilead Shalit. Um, it People all of a sudden, this is problematic. It's so, you know, if if you think about games that are adaptations, James Cameron is not the greatest human. Am I gonna hold that against the Avatar game? No. If I thought I cannot get past my dislike of a creator, I'm not gonna review the game. And that was a real issue for me with The Last of Us 2 because, well, they put a cross in the synagogue in that game, and I got so hammered for that, which is why it's so funny that it's turned on that principle. But I'm trying to think of a game that, I mean, I think Andrzej Sapkowski is a crusty bastard. I love The Witcher 3. I'm trying to think if there's a game I'm so put off by the creator that I can't be objective about the game. And people have asked me about certain things, like, do you think your dislike of the person, um, affected your opinion of the game? And it's like, look, I don't know this person. My criticisms of them are completely intellectual. So, well, no, because I don't know them as a human being. And that's where you get the dismissal, you're too close to it. If half your review of a game, I mean, Hogwarts Legacy is much more about the movie universe than anything to do with the books. If the whole thing is you railing against J.K. Rowling, pass it off to somebody else. This isn't eh, write an op-ed about how much you don't like her. Reviews are supposed to do a particular thing, and you've just rendered your review useless to anybody on the fence considering buying the game.
The chat is asking, Vincent Martin in the chat,
Mhm.
thinks we should talk about the Barbie movie. I've actually not seen it though. Do you have anything
That
you want to
makes
say
it a
about it?
bit difficult. I saw it twice in theaters. I was not expecting to like it as much as I did. Is it perfect? No. But I thought it was a lot of fun, and Ken was my favorite character.
He was enough for you?
He was more than enough. I mean, I Ryan Gosling has had such a career, and I don't know. It was fun. Like, it was campy and over the top, and I had one pink shirt in my entire wardrobe that I wore to it. It was fun. It was a cool phenomenon. It shows that we don't have to force people to consume products made by and for women. If it's entertaining, people will see it. If you compare it to something like the Captain Marvel movie that a lot of people pretended to like until it was time to see the sequel, right? If people had loved the first Captain Marvel movie, they would have raced out to see the Marvels. They didn't. they put on a brave face because they didn't want to admit it wasn't great. I saw the Marvels. I enjoyed the Marvels. It was fun. But, we don't have to force these things. All we have to do is eliminate the artificial barriers. We don't have to give an advantage. That's the difference between, oh no, we have to protect women, and let's just drop our biases. Let's really watch our assumptions and assume people are people, individuals are individuals, and there's nothing magically sparkly about a woman's heart.
So we've got about an hour left. Um, I do like the free form, but I do have a list of like 75 questions. No way we'll get to them all. But that's okay, because I think it's more interesting to explore the free form. But there are perhaps some of the questions I want to get to.
And if we have to follow up later, if afterwards you're like, oh, I wish that, we can always do a pickup.
So, well, I guess I'll leave it a little bit open ended for the first one. Do you want to tell me about your GamerGate experience?
I talked a bit about that off the top. I mean, it's funny because when I checked out your Discord, I recognized a few names. Like, okay, cool. I don't know. There's so much. We'd burn the whole hour. I talked some of it off the top. If anybody have any specific questions, I can answer those. But to me, it's in the past. It settled very little. People had I do think that there were enough people that were coming to the table in good faith with sincere concerns that weren't heard. And all I can do about that now is continue to allow that to inform my content going forward. I can't control the rest of the industry. Uh, that's that's the nutshell, I can say.
And you mentioned this too, but you were one of the not we were one of the handful of games journalists and a handful of feminist media critics, if not like one of the very few feminist media critics who was a professional critic at the time, and
Yeah,
still are, who went to bat for the GamerGate people and were like, no, actually, look, you guys, mean like the games press and
yeah.
some other people, you got this wrong. You actually went to bat for us and like tried to be more neutral and fair when interacting with the GamerGate people, myself included. We interacted back then,
Mhm.
and others as well. And you still interact with it. You're still in good terms with a lot of the GamerGate people. So I you saw it, I guess, very differently. And that, well, first off, thank you for being fair and honest. I'll say
Don't
that.
yeah, I appreciate that, but you don't have to thank me. The truth's the truth. And yeah, I'm still blacklisted from certain areas of the industry, but hey, it saved me a favor because I would have been canceled for being, you know, practicing Jewish anyway these days. So, whatever. I was ahead of the trend.
Well, let's you were blacklisted because you were too fair.
Oh, well, they didn't consider it fairness. They considered it secretly pro Gamergate, and therefore I was a gender traitor. And they didn't come out and say it. It's amazing the number of misogynist stereotypes that they whipped out to. The best was when um somebody from a well-known games website and Lady Bits came out and they said, "Well, your videos are long and I have young children at home, so we're going to pass on coverage." And it's like no woman would be able to say, "I've got kids at home. I can't watch 10 35-minute videos." No, it wasn't even. It was half hour. I kept them to a half hour. You know, Meanwhile, they watched everything Anita Sarkeesian put out, and she did two like 42-minute videos on the damsel in distress alone. This same person went to her lectures, like he could make the time for her. But me, Nope. And that is not an excuse a woman could ever put up with, could ever put up. I am too polarizing. I am too emotional. I am disqualifyingly biased. I'm too close to it. Uh, every kind of accusation in the book that are all things that hold women back in the entertainment media. You just saw all the convenient, you know, nudge, wink, oh, we don't like her, so we're going to throw a bunch of subjectives at her. So we don't want to admit the problem is we just don't like her.
And you think it was you think it was because in part and in perhaps large part because you wrote about the Gamergate stuff honestly that that's why they decided to treat you this way?
I think that was part of it. I think a much bigger part is that I actively declined to participate in any of the victim narratives. A lot of people wanted to talk to me about the harassment, the harassment. And I said, there are male journalists I know who have their, letter of resignation in their desk because they're cracking under this whole thing? Are you talking to them? Well, this is a piece about women. I don't want to be known as a target. I don't want to be known as a victim. I want to talk about ideas because, if the problem is we're too rough on everybody, okay, let's have that discussion. I agree. I do not want to be singled out for special protection because of my gender. That's going to cause me problems in the long term. I would much rather go out and have the fights and establish a track record so that people trust me. And when I say something that, might hit them the wrong way at first because of their history with the word, they'll listen to me when they won't listen to other people. And that was the wrong answer.
Can you, this is a very easy question.
Hmm.
Can you define what Gamergate was?
That's one of those things, ask three people, you'll get four answers. It was a reaction to a certain long-standing core of the video game market feeling like they were being sacrificed for an alleged new demographic that may or may not have come in for various reasons. And it was a general boiling point of distrust between people who play games and people who cover games. That's the best way I can really describe it.
Not a bad answer, though. Though I'm sure some people might want to seize on your use of the word reaction and be like, oh, well, it is reactionary then.
Well, what's wrong with reacting?
Ah, nothing.
Something has to be done to somebody for there to be a reaction. If somebody has an allergic reaction to bee stings, you don't say, "Why are you so sensitive?" Right? Reactions are legitimate, and that was one of the things that, because I do work in the mental health space as well. It disturbed me because games are things that people feel very close to. They are ways of getting through bad times for a lot of people. And of course, if they feel like this thing that gave them comfort is suddenly saying, you and everyone like you is a bad person who is irrelevant and is over, of course they're going to not react well to that. Again, remember, I come from a background where you got 13-year-old girls saying they hope you died if you insulted their favorite member of NSYNC. So, it's a human reaction. Is it ideal? No. Is it right? No. Is it human? Yeah. And human's gonna human.
So some of the people, well, I do think it's a little bit, if you ask, because it's funny too, because I would say something like that too. You ask 10 different people about Gamergate, you get 10 different answers or 20
Yeah.
different answers. I joke, but I think the reality is, I think in my first book I even like made a similar claim like that. But having interviewed over 40 people, and
Mm-hmm.
almost 50, I guess, if you count the offline interviews, um, having interviewed so many people about it, I think you get, at least from the pro Gamergate people, you get like just not that many answers really. I think you get like people who say it's about ethics in games
Right.
journalism. You get people who say that it's about artistic freedom, and you get people who say that it's about improving the gaming industry at large, and you get people who say it's um, about like culture war stuff. They want to be culture warriors.
Right.
And then
And,
like those are really like the four, I guess, main camps of people. There's like a couple outliers like Thydrin, who thought that it was about the government trying to brainwash people. Or not, sorry,
right.
trying use the government trying to use propaganda um, to influence the way people think about geopolitics.
And I mean,
But that's a
even
fringe
that,
view.
yeah, but I mean, even that's um, a lot of different perspectives, right? Those are big buckets of concerns.
Yeah, I think there's like a lot of overlap too. Like I think like the same people who cared about like most of the people I think like everybody agrees it's about ethics in games journalism. Like pretty much every single person I've talked to, they all agree that that's like a core part of the conversation. But where people start to differ is some people only want it to be about that, and other people wanted to go in
Hmm.
different directions.
And that's why what I heard from people is the idea of journalistic ethics is this weird thing that the articles that really got everything, it wasn't journalism, it was op-ed. And that's how people sort of slithered out of accountability there, is that it wasn't hard reporting when journalistic ethics would kick in. It was a bunch of hot take articles. And that's why I center back to it was a violation of trust. If you went into a car show and got up and got on the mic and say, "You're all destroying the planet. Cars are murder. Down with cars. Cars are over." You wouldn't really expect a warm reception, right? You know, it it, it was just so, I don't know what the thoughts were behind some of those articles. And I do think some relatively neutral pieces got lumped in with, the one that actually said gamers are over, gamers don't have to be your audience, that kind of stuff. It was generally, I think, an idea of, okay, who are these people that are speaking for us? Why are they really here? Because it certainly doesn't seem to be advocacy for players, and it certainly doesn't seem to be a love of these games. So, what exactly is going on here?
So, do you consider yourself a gamer, and if so, what does that mean to you?
I consider myself a gamer in that my preferred form of entertainment is video games. If I have a choice between watching a TV show or watching a movie and playing a game, I'm gonna play a game. Now, this is where we get into, I don't wanna, um, the idea of bona fides. I don't think being good at games makes you more of a gamer, but I did platinum Elden Ring, so there's a bit of a brag right there. I've been playing games since I was 3 years old on Pac-Man coin ops. I've been around, I've covered games, I've made shows about games, I'm making a game. And I've sort of seen the industry unfold in my life. So, but that, I say these things, and then other people, especially other women, goes, well, if that's the bar, then I'm not a gamer. No, no, no. That's why I say, if you love video games, go ahead and call yourself a gamer. You do not have to be as hardcore as me.
You're making a game?
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about that?
It's called Song of Sparkle Muffin. It's based on my boss fight series. And it ironically is about a fairy tale princess whose superpower is getting captured by bad guys. She actually attracts evil towards herself. And so that because which is wild because that's the make a game about a princess who saves herself is the Anita Sarkeesian thing. But it was just sort of this character that grew out of my boss fight web series, and people enjoy the character. And then there's a demon lady, and there's a guy who's forced into being a warrior who's actually really wants to be a sidekick, that kind of stuff. It's a game about a bunch of misfits and an examination of what it means to be a hero, what it means to be good. And it definitely, I mean, the web series, both Lady Bits and the Boss Fight web series, there were GGers on the backer list. So the fact that GamerGators backed my stuff is still kind of, I'm grateful for it. I don't, you know, it, and they go, oh, they're just doing that to make a point. The anti-gamer gators are like, this proves nothing. It's like, I don't know. I've talked to these guys. They they are legit. They are sincere. Being rough around the edges does not mean you're hateful. So, I mean, that's the short version. It's we've already done a crowd fund. We're getting the demo polished up as we speak. So by the time this book comes out, it'll probably be out. Let's hope. Oh my God, indie games. I just jinxed myself right there. But yeah, it was sort of time. And because we can do sort of old school JRPG turn based pixel art, we could actually make it. Because art is what's so, so, so expensive, right? And we really wanted to focus on the story and kind of have um the demon's a succubus. So she's a character named Beelzebub, literally the devil. That character came from Zoe Quinn calling me literally the devil. I forgot that was a direct tie-in. Yeah.
Ah,
And so after she did that, I'm like, I was pretty angry. I was pretty angry that she'd take that cheap shot. And so I'm like, okay, I can either get mad and get into this war, or I can make a joke out of it. And I realized my 666 YouTube video was coming up. And so I made this character, slap on the red corset, get two pitchforks, and it was, hello, puppets, 'tis I, Beelzebub, literally the devil, kiss, 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 stabby. And it just became a joke. And, I basically said, look, Zoe, that was a cheap shot. I put this in a video that was more serious about it. I get tempers flare. That was not intended to be public consumption. It was a leaked chat log. Uh, just, I'm open to an apology. Nope. Of course not. But I mean, that was just, you can't say you're pro women. You can't say you're advocating for women when you are calling a woman who disagrees with you literally the devil. I mean, talk about gingerphobia, right?
so I wasn't really gonna go this route. I've been toying with the idea. So actually,
Okay.
let me just give you a little bit of background about how I've been thinking about.
Hmm.
Obviously, there's like three specific people mostly who spent like a huge amount of time claiming that Gamergate was all about them and tried to make it all about themselves.
Right.
Um, Anita Sarkeesian, Brianna Wu, Zoe Quinn. Brianna Wu's story, it has a lot of holes in it. I think that she kind of was more of like an opportunist. When I first started this project, I should say, I really wanted to avoid talking about them altogether, these anti-Gamergate people.
Sure,
But
but that would yeah.
I,
Yeah.
as time went on and I've learned more information about them, um, I realized I have to cover it. So I had to start. I had to do research on them, and what I found was I'm not going to say anything bad about Anita Sarkeesian really, because actually, and this is the impression I had at the time, and maybe this is way off. I I don't view Anita Sarkeesian as being the same as like Zoe Quinn and Brianna Wu. I think that she
Fair.
was like a kind of a professional person, a bit of an outsider to online culture and to the gaming stuff. And she made some videos. They got a lot of pushback
Right.
and criticism, which it's fine. That's within the realms of ideas. We can talk about that. But some people were assholes to her, and
Yep.
she got a lot of mean tweets. She really did. And she even shared a list of the mean tweets that she received at one point, though it wasn't Gamergate people sending them. In fact, out of like the 100 people on the list, only two of them had ever used the hashtag, and both of them only used it once. Um,
Right.
so it wasn't mostly Gamergate people sending her the mean tweets. And of course, someone did call in threats to her speaking engagement at the university, and that never should have happened. That's evil. That's
Mhm.
shutting down discussion and free speech. Um, but I always thought of her as being someone who's kind of like an outsider to the whole thing a little bit. I don't mean that in a bad way. In fact, I think it kind of absolves her of some of. So from her perspective, a bunch of people are being mean to me on the internet, and
Sure. I mean,
and
it's funny
those
because
some of
ev
and the Gamergate people don't like me very much because they think my ideas are bad. Some of them do at least.
right.
Therefore, I'm just going to lump these two things together and claim it's all one thing, even though they're
Right.
not the same thing. So I
Right.
don't view her as like a malicious actor. There's not like a whole history of her like targeting specific individuals or
Except
making.
me.
Well, did she? Oh fuck! What
Oh
happened?
God, this was not her finest moment. She took she screen capped a tweet where I don't even know what I said. I don't remember it anymore. Somebody just reminded me of this recently. She scratched out my name so people didn't know who she was dunking on. And it was basically, okay, Miss Cool Chick afraid of cool chick okay with sexism. And everybody's like, oh my God, that's you. I'm like, what do you mean? Oh my God, that's me. She knew what she was doing. And I wish she had just come at me, girl. Like, come at me, sister. Like, say my name. But no, cool chick okay with sexism from Anita Sarkeesian. Literally the devil from Zoe Quinn. And Brianna Wu apparently recently claimed I outed her as trans.
Well, maybe I need to reevaluate my opinion of Anita Sarkeesian. But yeah, I think she
Not
said some
harass
really some stupid stuff.
Let's not
I didn't.
harass
Yeah.
women, says the women taking at hominem attacks at other women. It's
So
just so bizarre.
so let me ask, because I actually was like during Gamergate too. I did actually view her and view her quite differently from the other two people. Because if you look at the other two people, their stories are like fucking crazy. Okay, like they really are. Like Brianna Wu's like she was basically like between the Steam Greenlight thing, which doesn't seem to be true, her claim to flee her home, which doesn't seem to be true, and like the fact that she entered the conversation by pretending to be a Gamergate person for like a month with this
Oh,
fake
really? I
account.
didn't know
Yeah,
that.
she had this whole
Okay.
fake account called Bro Lols, where she trolled Gamergate people for a month by pretending to be one of them and deliberately saying stupid stuff on purpose to make Gamergate look bad. And then she does have a defense for this. She says that she was satirizing the Gamergate people. Um, it just
That's
seems like
called trolling.
it seems like
What?
she, yeah, it seems like she basically has not been entirely forthcoming in the story that she's been telling the media. Um, so that's one thing. I don't think she's like an evil human being necessarily, right? But she's like an opportunistic person who saw something that she could use to her advantage to further her career, and she did it.
Hey, but let's face it, this sort of playing the victim and sort of manipulating the situation, this is the proper way to girl. right? All of them did very, very, very well playing the victim. I don't begrudge them that. What they're saying about me is not true. I mean, you know firsthand, I am not okay with sexism. You know,
Yeah.
I mean, it's just an absurd the absurdity of characterizing the whole of a person as evil or supporting of evil ideas because you personally don't like them. This is a sign of how women are infantilized through, benevolently sexist narratives. And so the idea that, oh, they're victims, so we're and I mean, okay, there's better and worse ways of criticizing people. Not all criticism is fair. But at the same time, if the Zoe post had been written by a woman about a man, that whole thing would have gone down very, very differently. And I do think the people, well, Zoe definitely has claim to being the originator of Gamergate, right? Though that was more the Zoe post, because it depends. When do you count the beginning of Gamergate? Is it the Zoe post? Is it the hashtag Gamergate? Is it the Gamers Are Dead
Well,
articles?
at the time I would say the gamers are dead articles, and that's how I approached it at the start of this project. But different people have
Okay.
different definitions. I just let people say whatever the fuck they want, basically.
Okay, but that's fair. I mean, the Gamers Are Dead articles came out of another wave of haterade tossed at Anita Sarkeesian. And what happened there is that, I mean, I was looking into should I write about the whole Zoe post thing. And I reached out to somebody who knew Zoe, and he said Zoe would like privacy. Okay, this is a personal matter. If she wants privacy, I'm going to give her privacy. But then something happened with Anita Sarkeesian, and Anita never wants privacy with these things. And so everyone who was chomping at the bit to write about it took the opportunity, and it takes about 3 days to generate an article and put it online. And that's why, wham, all those articles showed up within hours of each other because it was this pent up demand. And then the thing on Anita happened. They finally got the green light, and boom, that's what happened. No conspiracy.
So I've I got pushed back on this, and I'm glad someone
Hmm.
pushed me back on it. I wanted to
Hmm.
explore it. I don't want to talk about specific individuals too much, but we can just
Sure.
soldier
Fair.
past
Me
it.
neither.
Soldier
Yeah,
past
yeah,
it.
yeah.
I do view Zoe Quinn as being probably a sociopath or something close enough to it where she doesn't seem to have a conscience at all and does like really terrible stuff to other human beings on a regular basis. So I didn't want to I reached out to her to see if she wants to do an interview, and I was like really worried about doing so. I'm like, well fuck, dude. If Zoe Quinn finds out that I'm writing this book, it doesn't matter how fair I'm gonna be. There's like a non-zero chance that she's gonna sick all of her followers on me, which is like whatever. I mean, I could deal with that, but she has a reputation. She's gone after people's jobs before too, like really, like it's like Tim Saray, and if she's willing to go after Tim Saray and try and get him fired in real life and like destroy his career, like she probably doesn't have any qualms going against me, and I'm not as
There
famous as Tim Saray is.
there was a direct incident with me where I was actually on a stream with Aaron. I didn't book it, and Milo started up with me, and I'll be very careful because all the information I have is secondhand mostly. But um apparently Zoe went to the police claiming that some of in down in Massachusetts, saying that, and again, apparently, I have no direct information here, saying that what Milo did to me happened to her. And so I ended up 45 minutes on the phone with a cop down in Massachusetts. I think it was Massachusetts, yeah, but saying, look, you know, this I have to do the right thing, the bane of being a lawful good character, right? I have to do the right thing and defend a guy who I don't know really well, but no, he was not harassing her. He was not giving out her information. People were coming at me, and the cops basically said you'd have to drive down here to make a statement in person. But what they said was, look, burden of proof is on her. She's got to prove her case in court. And from what we see here, they hadn't looked at it at the time, but they said if what you're saying is true, it will be dismissed. And that's a disconnect between the legal system and the reality for people who these claims are made of, that you never quite get your reputation back after an accusation has been made. The court system is not designed to rehabilitate your reputation. The courts are designed to prove guilt beyond reasonable doubt. And so that was a real, and of course, that's why all bets are off between, I mean, she may have forgotten why she doesn't like me now, but that is what I remember happening. And it was a while after that that literally the devil thing came out. And it's like, I'm sitting there going, this is wild. All the only direct thing I've ever said to her is, Zoe, stop lying about me. You know, it just, and I have no direct evidence on any of the direct claims um in anything else regarding her. I can only speak to what I personally experienced, and my take, giving her the benefit of the doubt, is she had some friends who were telling her a whole bunch of stuff, and things can get framed that you can listen to something, and if somebody's probably psychologically primed you to hear something that's not there, you will. And so I suspect she probably legitimately thinks I'm Satan incarnate. But I know what happened. And it's not the way any of those individuals are framing it. And, part of the reason I came on here is this stuff matters. Unfortunately, Twitter advanced search is kind of broken, or you could go back and, find the tweets in question, things like that. Because the nice thing about Twitter is I thought I could document all this stuff. But if you do manage to get access to older tweets from that time, you will be able to find dates, times, all that stuff about some of the stuff going down. So there is documentation for some of what I'm saying. But I do have to be careful about divulging who gave me some of this information, because obviously at the time they were a source.
So you said earlier that you were hesitant to write about the GamerGate stuff after a while and talk about it because you viewed, or well, you talked about it some, but you covering it as a
Right.
journalist because you thought that you had gotten too involved or dragged into it. Now,
Yep.
obviously, I was involved with GamerGate too, um, and I'm writing this book and I'm interviewing a bunch of people. I view it as an act of journalism and as an act of history, I guess too.
Right.
But I think that that's totally fine as long as I disclose that I was involved.
Well, you're also doing it from an actively pro Gamergate perspective,
No, no, not at all,
right?
actually.
Oh, okay.
No, I've been very
Because
neutral. Well, I mean, like, I've been as neutral as I can be. I've tried to be very fair.
yeah,
I've interviewed a
I
ton of
I mean
anti-Gamergate people too.
James Desborough wrote a book about his experiences back in the day. I read it. It was awesome. I think that everybody has got to do what feels, and this is the thing about journalistic ethics, and we never got to have the conversation about ethics in games journalism. It would, despite all the mantras, that there are a lot of sort of situational AB switches that depend on the type of reporting you're doing and your ability to be objective. And I wanted to do objective reporting on GamerGate at the time when I was writing for Metal Eater. I did not want to do the I kind of story, and the only story that was open to me after that was my own personal experiences. So I just decided to stop wearing the hat of journalist, because I mean, was I pissed off at all the lying that was going on about me? Yeah, I was really pissed off about all the lying that was going on about me. So I couldn't be objective. And so I had to go first person. And so I went, look, I'm recusing myself as a reporter on this. I'm going to tell my story and give my opinions now as a person. And that's a very important distinction that really gets blurred in gaming a lot. What is opinion and what is fact? And so much of this stuff that we call games journalism is actually gaming commentary, because there's only a handful of people who can do actual shoe leather journalism. Guys like Jason Schreier, and he's the one that gets all the leaks and all the tips because he's just the guy people go to. But very few people have that access. The games companies crack down like crazy. And that's another thing that, oh, we support women, we support minorities in gaming. Okay, so elevate those voices. Don't keep giving the scoops to the same four white dudes. Nothing wrong with white dudes. Just you can't say you want more women and more, minorities, and then keep giving the big stories to the same four guys who all have the same demographics, right? Um, that's my opinion, based in fact. If you're reporting fact-based journalism, you do have to talk to both sides. You do. You can't just talk to one side. That's not balanced reporting. And what got lost in this whole thing was the fact that people got punished for talking to the pro Gamergate side. Okay, there was bad blood with Total Biscuit, rest in peace, even before that. But this idea that reporters were supposed to take a stand against harassment of women in games. If you are a commentator, yes, that is your job. If you are a reporter, that is not your job. It's called reporting because you are supposed to report. And it's really very important to keep those two things straight in your head. And that is the core of all ethical standards in journalism. That concept. That.
Do you want to do like a lightning round real quick? Because we only got a half hour.
Sure.
Okay. Um, well, is there anything else you want to say about games journalism specifically?
It's very hard to do. I wish it was easier to do. I wish there was more access. Even at E3, we had lost. I'm glad E3's gone because it doesn't serve the purpose it once did, which is access. You know, early days, you could walk in on the floor, get a comment, get a hands-on demo. PAX, you used to be able to go right up to the developers and talk to them. That access doesn't happen anymore. Games journalism in dedicated sites, is on the decline right now. And I do think that if they had handled the Gamergate controversy better, they wouldn't be quite so on the ropes. Because what's happened as gaming has spread into the mainstream newspapers, magazines, TV, entertainment TV shows, local news, national news, international news covers games now. And so in terms of size of the audience, these gaming websites can't compete with these major outlets. What gaming websites have, or they should have, is the trust of the aficionado, right? Trust of the core gamer, that they are expected to know more than somebody doing a stand-up report for CBS News. That's what they blew in 2014, 2015. And I still think it was a mistake.
Do you have any thoughts on deep freeze?
The database operation, that thing?
Yeah.
Uh, I think it was an interesting I haven't looked in on it in a while. I'm aware of it. I think that maybe I'm not the best person to comment. I mean, at the time I thought, "Yeah, go, give it a shot."
Do you have any thoughts on SPG airplay?
See, I was actually invited to that and I couldn't go because my stepdad had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's.
Oh no.
And so that was the last family vacation that we had while he was still, you know, and we knew he was going to be mostly there for that. So that's why I wasn't there. I thought it was a noble attempt to do something. I also think it was, that symposium was somewhat naive because it was a bunch of, journalists who didn't understand the internet kind of organizing it and trying to do things the
Well,
old-fashioned way.
Koretsky, I don't think is a journalist who doesn't understand the internet.
Yeah.
Koretsky is, I think, like one of the greatest journalists, perhaps of our generation, if not
He
human history.
he legit cared. And that I hats off to the guy for trying. I think the issue with that is that it needed to be a series of talks and they could only organize one. I totally understand why it wasn't, but that really needed to be an ongoing conversation because I mean, obviously it turned into a bit of a three-ring circus, and it was, cut short by the bomb threat. So it was kind of wild to go, well, I might have been there in another timeline. It was a little surreal with that whole thing. I think it was a good attempt. I ultimately think it did not produce any more clarity because they were stonewalled by the anti-Gamergate side.
Can I live in the timeline where you replaced Milo?
See, see that I his entire participation in Gamergate, again, if the left-wing media had responded differently to his involvement, because I was trying to pitch articles to various outlets and they were like, "Nope, Milo's involved, Breitbart's involved, we are not touching this, it's too nuclear." And it's like, come on, you're no platforming. And that was the tragedy, is that I heard from the Gamergate side saying no one else will listen to us. We know he's not great, but he's the only one that will give us the time of day. And I was telling people the reason no one else will give you the time of day is because of him. You
Well,
are
no,
being
there.
used.
I don't think they would have given us the time of day, even if he didn't cover Gamergate at all.
That was the excuse I was given for not getting the green light to run more articles. That's all I know. That it was like, "Nope, it's him. We're not touching it. It's just gonna be a gong show." That wasn't the term they used, but it was just, "Nope, it's him. Nope, it's him. It's bad news. You're just painting a target on your back because it's him." And I mean, they weren't wrong, but again, if somebody's willing to take that hit because they believe in covering the story, shouldn't we be allowed? This is how women are protected out of public spaces.
I have to ask, do you have receipts on them blacklisting you or them shooting down these articles where you could have covered Gamergate in a more fair and honest way than what we got?
They were verbal conversations, or chat conversations, so no, not there. Um, and the blacklisting is one of those things where, like I said, that, "Well, your videos are long and I have to look after my kids," BS excuses about that. And do I have a record of that conversation anymore? Again, I don't think so because that was a Twitter DM. Um,
Well, you go. It might be worth checking
but
because
I was told by at the time I was told by developer friends of mine things like I'd love to hang out with you, but things are tense here and I don't want to be seen with you in public. And again, that would be blowing a source if I divulged who those people were.
did you see the South by Southwest Save Point panel or the panels that I ran at Arch Anime and Natsucon?
I was aware of the save point panels, I didn't see them.
Uh, what do you think of the argument that video games cause and or reinforce sexist attitudes?
I did a whole episode of Boss Fight on that. It's nonsense. Um like I was talking about the performative gaze, people who like sexist content will be attracted to sexist content. People who don't like sexist content may play a game with some sexist content because they're playing around it. There is no proof of a cultivated effect from video games regarding increased sexist attitudes. In fact, there has been some studies that actually say women experienced a boost in, I forget the exact word, but basically they had them playing. I think it was Cammy from Street Fighter with the, the thong bodysuit, and they found positives, they found some negatives, and all the stuff they claimed games did, they're finding, a much more clear correlation between social media and those attitudes. But again, we're going to have to replicate some of these studies to be sure.
Yeah, if you want to link me some of those, I'd love to look over them sometime.
The beneficial studies, yeah, I'll see if I can find them. They're a few years old at this point, but I'll try to find them. But yeah, there's absolutely no evidence that a video game can cultivate, meaning instill a sexist attitude in an adult. The studies that showed the increased aggression towards women. There was that one Italian study that was flawed because it included 15 to 18-year-olds. And we know that that period of adolescent male development, empathy becomes a dump stat. And that poisoned the whole pot. They were also not able to replicate those results.
Some critics argue that GamerGate was mostly or entirely right wing. Do you think that was accurate?
I know that's not accurate. I mean, Brad Glasgow's the guy to talk to about that. He did the survey.
He did very good work, and I interviewed him too.
Okay. So yeah, he's the expert on that. He can speak to that more than anything. No, I mean the people I talked to, we wouldn't get on very well if they were staunchly right wing. That's just that most people do not fit neatly into left wing and right wing. Our opinions are all over the map. So that's just citation needed, right?
Uh, we don't have a huge amount of time, but do you want to briefly describe or discuss your personal political views or philosophy?
I used to consider myself very left wing. I don't know anymore. Uh my interest is doing what I can where I can. So the big factional partisan debates don't interest me. My goals are about creating spaces where a true exchange of ideas can happen. And the absolutely unfettered free speech I have not found works. The absolute we must have rules and the whole progressive stack thing, that doesn't work either. The spaces I try to run, the environments I try to try to cultivate are where every individual is treated like an individual and we listen to each other. So anyone can say, I don't like that, please stop doing it. And, that's not just silencing spell. There can be a bit of a conversation, but there's no shortcut to that. And so, I calling myself a feminist is more trouble than it's worth these days. I am pro-trans, though I am hated now because I didn't support the Hogwarts Legacy boycott. I was actually interviewed by the Washington Post about that. That was kind of bizarre. Um, Things kind of blew up that week, but I do believe that we have further to go in terms of all types of, inclusion, including disability and neurodivergent inclusion. And the way we do that is by talking to each other, not silencing each other. That being said, there's some, I don't have all the answers regarding how to do that. And so, sorting myself into a political category these days, I don't even know where the lines are, especially since I'm Canadian and we have, a 3+2 party system instead of a 2-party system.
Do you have any thoughts on Not Your Shield?
Oh God. Not your shit. Refresh my memory of what not. It was at the GamerGate, the Vivian James thing.
No. Well, if you don't remember, we can just skip it.
I mean, I remember Not Your Shield, and I
A
remember
lot
it
of
being.
the anti-Gamergate people and the games media, and I guess maybe the mainstream media too, kept saying, "Gamergate's a bunch of white men who hate women," and a bunch of non-white, non-men people,
Right.
and gay people, trans people,
Hmm.
other people who weren't straight white men said, "Well, hang on, that's not true. You shouldn't attack us, and you shouldn't one dismiss that we exist, and two, you shouldn't
Right.
lie, and three, we're not going to be your shield so that you can attack gamers and attack Gamergate with lies, basically."
Yeah. See, the way I approach problems like this, and this is my, neurodivergency kicking in. Let's give them absolutely maximum benefit of the doubt. Let's say they're absolutely right, and Gamergate is just a bunch of white men who hate women. Okay, whatever. So, what do we do about that problem? Do you go, "You're bad, white men who hate women," or do you go, "Okay, how can we change a couple of minds here?" And going, "You are white men who hate women," changes no one's mind, no matter whether the statement was factually accurate or not. It was a red herring. It was sophistry. It doesn't solve the problem. So what's the point?
Speaking of the claims of Gamergate people being misogynists who hate women and want to drive them out of the industry,
Right.
um, or that it's a harassment campaign, what do you think of those claims, and why do you think some people make those claims?
Well, it's an easy dismissal, right? What is a harassment campaign? I mean, if this is going to be a contentious statement, but if Gamergate's a harassment campaign, so were the people spoiling Hogwarts Legacy for people on political grounds, right? Either the tactic is bad or it's not. And even if it is, I mean, har- is protesting outside Supreme Court justices' houses a harassment campaign, right? Is throwing red paint on a bookstore owned by somebody who runs a charity for former IDF soldiers a harassment campaign? To me, again, it's sophistry. Are we going to engage when it's hard to make things better for everyone? Or are we going to just find cheap, easy way to dismiss people who, because it's invalidating the the pain that when I really listen to people on the Gamergate side, the pain and the fear and the real intense belief that they were being shoved out of a place that they thought was safe. And when people feel threatened that way, they don't necessarily behave ideally. And the challenge is to validate those feelings without rewarding the bad behavior. And again, the way to do that is to center the feelings center the legitimate concerns. Instead, they centered the harassers. And that is not consistent with any best practice I have ever seen.
Normally, I would push back and like play the devil's advocate for the harassment people, but we only got 12 minutes, so maybe it's not. Or do you think it would be worth doing or no?
I mean, I'm not my my,
By the
my
harassment people, I
attitude
mean the
is
people who think that GamerGate was about harassment. That's not the people who
I
actually harass people.
I mean, I
If
don't
such
know.
people
I
existed,
Did
though some
harassment
people did.
happen? Yes. Did harassment happen on both
Did,
sides? Well, yes, literally the devil, right? So I don't even understand the complaint there. I admit I've tried to do that since what is any protest but a harassment campaign, you know?
all right, now we're getting. Oh, actually, sorry. Before we get to the light items and the fun stuff, what do you think about how the media covered GamerGate?
Very disappointing. Very disappointing, not much more interested in emotional narratives instead of actually seeking fact. I the media outside of the people very very concerned about online stuff didn't even know it was a thing, and I don't think that's a bad thing, but I do think it was shallow and reactive, and in terms of really good reporting, there wasn't a ton of it.
Did anyone in the media reach out? Well, you were the media in some ways, right? But I
Yeah.
guess I'll ask: Did it? You were obviously you talked about GamerGate a lot. You were on friendly terms with the pro GamerGate people, and
Not I would push back on that. They hated my guts at first because of the
some well,
whole Polygon thing. Yeah.
some of them did.
Some of them do to this day. It's really interesting, and that's okay. That's why, I mean, I'm an example of somebody who could have gone, they harassed me, they're evil, and I'm like, no, some people are going to be jerks every time emotions run hot. My job is to try to see why the W5H, right? Who, what, when, where, why, and how. And unless you could truly understand the why of both sides and not just dismiss as well, it's a harassment campaign, because that's the anti-Gamergate narrative. If you can't also report the pro-Gamergate narrative, you're not doing fair and balanced reporting.
So, did anyone in the media reach out to you to discuss the movement?
Well, there were a lot of people who were like, do you want to talk about harassment? And I'm like, no. And then they went away. I said, I'm happy to talk about what, and I mean, some streamers did. I count them as media. I think David Packman um, reached out. I was on his show about it.
Oh,
So
that's
yes,
right, you were.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah, yeah. David
he
Packman
did a
did,
good
and
job
yeah.
for the most part. I mean, like obviously, yeah, for the most. What do you think his? What do you want to? I don't want to talk about David Packman, but if you want to say something about David Packman, you can. I won't even push
No, no.
back
I mean,
probably.
it just for the record. I mean, we didn't really talk about GamerGate when I did Dave Rubin's show. It's just a question of, is this considered, mainstream enough? And yes, I do think they're media. So, whether you think somebody's good media or not good media, yes, people did reach out. Uh, I, wish there was a little bit more balanced reporting, but some people did. People tried. It was just, there are so many nuances and so much coding involved in this whole thing that it was very very impenetrable for the mainstream, and most people went, well, it's a bunch of angry nerds fighting, whatever, He-Man, Star Wars, all kept happening. It We're not solving for the problem. And that's why, if the methods that were deployed against Gamergate worked. The fandom menace wouldn't have happened, you know.
Was that
Comicsgate
a
is
real
still
thing? The
going.
fandom
Oh
menace thing?
yeah.
I don't know if it.
It
I don't know anything
it
about
was
it,
a
but
thing. It
yeah.
was a thing. You know, the whole Snyderverse thing, the whole He-Man controversy. This stuff keeps happening. And if the tactics deployed against them worked, we would see a diminishing of it, not it gaining steam. Pardon the pun, because Steam's a gaming service, but it's just not working. We need to change gears. We need to be having discussions like this, and we need dialogues, not debates. But people are afraid to do it because they're afraid what happened to me would happen to them, and they just get excommunicated.
Okay, we got 6 minutes. I want to
We
be
can go another
respectful of your.
10. It's okay. We can go
Okay,
we can
I
go
was
a bit
about to
over there.
ask, are you okay if we go a little bit over? But
Yep, no problem.
okay, all right. What do you think? Do you have any thoughts on the? Have you seen the GamerGate Wikipedia article?
The one about the ants or the no, I'm
Oh,
kidding. Um, I
I
I
wish that was the article.
yeah, I stopped looking. Thanks to a stalker of mine and the whole Gamergate controversy, she managed to get my Wikipedia entry iced for not being sufficiently relevant. And so I just have generally a anything I see on Wikipedia, I make sure I can find from another source. I don't treat it as legitimate anymore. I mean, I'm sure the vast majority of information on there is accurate, but for any of this pop culture stuff, I know that that was a real battleground regarding the whole thing. But just my own personal experiences in the constant vandalism of my wiki and ultimately the destruction of it because somebody had a vendetta. Wikipedia is not news. It is what it is. If you take it for what it is as just sort of a clearinghouse of opinion, awesome. It's a great first step, but you have to check absolutely everything that's on there.
Would you like to see, quote, the narrative, unquote, about Gamergate change?
Yeah, I'd like to see it become more productive and more nuanced. Uh, I think a lot of people just don't want to talk about it anymore, and I'd like the sort of specter of the label. It was the whole drop the tag thing. Um, I'd like to see the specter of the label go away, especially now when the seeing other similar scandals get much more intense and much more heated and you know I would like a second look at it, not just because of my interest in history, but also I do think that if we don't learn from past mistakes, we're doomed to repeat it. And you know sometimes you have to have an uncomfortable conversation with appropriate ground rules. And I do think we need to cultivate more challenging dialogues and set those ground rules in advance so there's an understanding of look, no cheap shots. We're going to have a discussion, not a debate. We're going to try to find common ground. And I do think that part of the the process of making gaming and games better is to do better when you get these sort of upheavals when something hits a button and people may not communicate in the best way. And again, it's all about rewarding the good behavior, not centering the bad behavior and validating the feelings without validating the negative tactics.
Oh, I was gonna ask you. what do you think the media can learn about how they covered Gamergate? But I think you just answered that basically.
Yeah, I do really think that the no platforming was a mistake. I think that a lot of people I knew just sincerely wanted to have a conversation, and a lot of people wanted to know what the deal really was with those articles. And, I gave it to you. Uh people were it was going to be a little difficult to get the facts out that there was no active conspiracy there. It's just the way the news cycles worked. Some people were never going to be convinced. That doesn't make it any less true. Some people were open to being convinced, and you can only persuade the people who are open to persuasion. And I do think that, again, the the media went and demonized Johnny Depp supporters the same way they demonized Gamergate supporters. And it's like, really? We're doing this again? Really? Every time you do that, you are just losing the trust of the audience. And guys like Philip Bump are writing articles that we have to do something about the trust people have in the media. We're not going to get trust with people in the media if we keep demonizing not only the stuff they like, but demonizing them. You can talk about the tactics being a problem, but do not ascribe negative motivations to people without proof. Benefit of the doubt is the most effective strategy. And that's the mistake they keep making.
I've got 11 more questions that I think are important, and I'm skipping some.
Let's
But
blow through as many as we
all right,
can.
all right,
Yeah.
all right. One of 11. What's your favorite video game?
Single one?
Oh, you can pick a couple.
I love the God of War franchise. Kratos is my inner voice. People know that about me. I've put so many hours in RimWorld, though. Oh my god, so many hours in RimWorld. And I played through the first Baldur's Gate games probably 12 times a piece. So that's a short list. There's a lot of them. I'm loving Alan Wake 2. I love the Spider-Man games. I am a sucker for the From Software games, even though they drive me crazy. Um, but the Zelda franchise keeps bringing me back. And I just started Mario Wonder. That is going to be my holiday thing. Is Mario Wonder. I'm finally going to blow through that. Um I can talk for 20 minutes on the games I love.
I know, I
So,
know.
yeah. So, I mean, if I had to pick one, it would be the God of War franchise, but I think that it gives people the wrong idea about me. Cause but I did a 4-part series on trauma, PTSD, and gaming, and I got to speak to the devs of God of War for that series, and we had a absolutely wonderful conversation about how that was absolutely not in their minds, but it is so woven into Greek mythology that it kind of came out. And so the way they pivoted Kratos to Norse myth and how Norse myth functions in a different way is just, oh my god, like there's an example of the game is a game. It plays amazingly. The combat is incredible. It's so damn smooth and intuitive and communicates player intent so well. And yet, it's also a good story. To me, that's one of the pinnacles of AAA. But there are many, many others as well. I love the Far Cry games. I love the Spider-Man games. Like they're Ghost of Tsushima, love that game. So yeah.
Do you have any thoughts on Vivian James or Gamergate related art projects?
Vivian James is weird because she'd be a very, very easy cosplay for me. Um, I liked it. I thought it was really interesting that they did almost like a bomber girl, like a World War II bomber girl for Gamergate for the exact same reasons. It was a morale boost. Um, to me, we could do a whole thing on Vivian James and the fact that for this group that allegedly hates women, they did a mascot which was a normal girl in a sweater and jeans. And the fact that it just sort of happened and sort of got adopted, and that we didn't properly break down the potential meanings of the semiotics there, was a missed opportunity. Again, I think the whole Vivian James thing was absolutely fascinating.
What was your favorite moment during Gamergate?
God. Um, there were so many weird ones. I'm trying to think. It's all a bit of a blur, I admit. Um, Probably the creation of my Beelzebub character. The fact that I took that really, really nasty, hateful comment and turned it into something that is now. I took cruelty and turned it into entertainment, and now people really like the character and they quote the character, and there's fan art of the character, and people have done music with the character. And to me, that's an indication of why this cheesy, campy, busty succubus type stuff is important, because it is taking the crappiness of life and turning it into something fun. And since I did that, who am I to say nobody else can do that just because it may personally make me feel uncomfortable?
If you could have sorry, I'm mixing two questions together.
Mm.
If you could change one thing about Gamergate, what would it be? Could have changed one thing about Gamergate. What would it be?
Yeah, I mean, one thing that's hard, is saying I wish everybody would have listened more. Is that one thing, or is that a whole bunch of things?
That's a great answer, actually. I like that answer.
Yeah, I just wish, because that's what was needed. Everybody just needed to listen more. If people had listened more, they would have realized that a lot of people weren't evil, they were just upset.
What would you personally have done differently during Gamergate?
Oh, hindsight being 2020. Because I mean, the whole thing of what would I have done differently? I made a lot of mistakes, but I learned so much from that I don't know. I mean, it's hard to separate one thing from the whole. Um, I probably would have watched my language. I would have come at the pro Gamergate side less academically, trying to show I am an expert on this. I probably would have kind of sat down, taken my own advice, talk less and listen more.
Let's say it's 10 years from now, and an online movement is looking to Gamergate for guidance for their movement. What advice do you have for them?
Don't rely on the media to spread your message. Don't cozy up to any journalist. Make your statements have actual ask, because that's one of the thing. People were able to brand Gamergate as one thing as the other because there was no ask. And I know the leaderless movement was part of it, but leaderless also means faceless. And so I really think there were a lot of people with very sincere concerns who were fighting thinking they were going to lose. And you cannot win a fight. You can't visualize yourself winning. Fight to win. Don't fight to just go down swinging.
What have you personally learned from Gamergate?
Certainly certain rhetoric things. I no longer, I mean, these were extended conversations coming out of it. I no longer use the term mansplaining, uh, because it's hurtful to some people. I the former Gamergaters actually finally talked me into doing men's content, and that in some ways has been more successful than my women's content, which is wild. And I was really resistant because I'm like, I don't want to tell you guys your business. I don't want to tell you guys your business. Like, no, 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 we want this. And to think about that, that's kind of wild, yeah.
Well, I think it's important that people talk about men's issues and also women's issues too. So,
Yeah, like, that's the thing, I was like, "I don't wanna tell you guys your business." I'm like, "But you're a reporter. You have a platform. We can talk about this stuff." And it's like, I was very, very hesitant, and I think because of it being former GamerGaters saying this, it's like, "Okay, if they want me to do this, there's an opportunity here. Let's just shut up and take the risk, and if people hate me for it, whatever, not new, but maybe we can do something good here." And we are doing something good here, which is it's a bit of a green shoot. I don't want to oversell it, but to me, the fact that we started on such completely opposite sides and managed to form some dialogue, that's great. That's all I can ask for.
now I know you were neutral on Gamergate, so it might be a bit of a
Mhm.
weird question for you to answer, but was Gamergate successful?
Well, I mean, that particular part of it was, I guess, like I started off thinking it was a harassment campaign based on the Zoe Quinn stuff. I remember my first description of Gamergate, or before it was called Gamergate. Oh no, it was Gamergate, the Zoe post or whatever. But it was a bunch of
Well,
people griefing a
the
woman in
name
gaming.
Gamergate came a couple weeks after the Zoe Post thing.
Yeah, but somebody asked me who's Zoe Quinn, and I said, "Oh, a bunch of people that hateful people are harassing." That's where I started, and the people that did bother to show enough kindness to have a conversation did manage to pull me somewhat away from that. And I don't agree with a lot of the tactics that I really wish they hadn't been done on both sides. But I people made friendships that continue to this day, and that sounds so bizarre, and people are like, how can you say this? But this is the point. This is why I've stayed sort of neutral on the issues, because I know that there was no conspiracy to write the Gamers Are Dead articles. I can't cross that line because that would be self-gaslighting. But I do think that it people did form community, and they did form a sense that people are there for them. And I think that that is in a lot of ways what gaming as a space, or gaming as a collection of communities, is about: finding your people. So that may not be like broad social change success, but I think in terms of what really matters, you can count that as a success.
3 questions left.
Okay.
What do you think of this interview project?
I'm just glad somebody's trying. I wouldn't do it. Hats off to you. You got to have a strong stomach. Um, Anybody who's trying to seek truth, I support.
Do you think I've done? I don't know how much have you seen this project outside of this in one interview with you. Um, but do you think I've done a pretty fair job, or how do you think I've been with? Because obviously I have a pro Gamergate bias, but
Uh,
I try to be fair and fact based, neutral ish. I got neutral. I do try to
no,
be
I mean,
neutral.
the fact that uh, the fact you talked to Troy, who I do think has been done dirty by popular opinion. I asked a few people who I trust what they thought of the process that they went through with you, and they all said you were fair. So, I think that's the best compliment anybody can give in this kind of process.
It is. Thank you.
Yeah.
Some people reading this might hold a positive view of Gamergate. Do you have anything you want to say to these people?
A positive view of Gamergate?
Well, I'm going to ask you the negative
Uh,
one next.
okay. What I say to Gamergate? You guys got done dirty, but please be careful who you trust and who you put your faith in going forward, because that was the most heartbreaking element seeing people who I knew were not great grandstanding all over Gamergate who weren't gamers, didn't even like gamers, but gamers were so desperate for that sort of representation that you guys got used. And that's fair. And it's okay to be upset about it. Just, you know, hopefully this will not happen again. But if it does, let's play to win, not play to go down swinging.
And now the inverse. Some people reading this might hold a negative view about Gamergate. Is there anything you want to say to them?
Oh my god, let it go. Let it go like Elsa from Frozen. Just let it the fuck go. In the grand scheme of things, it was not that big a deal, no matter how upsetting it was at the time. This is about video games. It's supposed to be a safe place to have strong opinions. You know, people are allowed to have their views. It really wasn't the big deal that people made it into. And you can completely disagree with me on that, but people need to let it go, please, for the love of God.
Awesome. Anything else you want to talk about?
Yeah. No, no. I mean, I think as much as you can cover a messy, complicated, multi-year internet phenomenon, I mean, I think that was decent broad strokes. Hope the chat enjoyed it. I couldn't see much of it. I didn't know where it was, but hope the
There's
chat
YouTube chat,
found it
Kick chat,
interesting.
and Twitch chat, but only YouTube's really especially active. And got
Oh,
it.
okay. But thank you for the people who watch live because I think they're really important to this process just because it is a live record of what was said. So the people watching it live are a big part of the accountability and transparency process. So thank you for taking the time.
No, for sure. And sometimes I do take questions from chat, not super often. And I do want to say this too. Look, if I was doing this and I was getting 0 views, um, I'd be disheartened. I might still do it. I don't know, but maybe not, right? Would I be putting in the because I probably spent like hundreds of hours, like over 100 hours of my life, maybe 200, 300, I don't
Mhm.
know how many hours, between like yeah, probably hundreds of hours, not just the interviews, which are themselves like almost 100 hours, if not more at this
Just
point,
just
but just the
setting
research, the setting it
setting this
up.
up.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
it's insane.
Yeah.
And if I didn't
Yeah.
have the support that I got, and look, I kind of wish there was more support, but like some of you people have been really supportive, and I really appreciate it. And I really appreciate the feedback that people have given. I appreciate you chatting in. I appreciate you guys watching the videos, and I appreciate when you like and comment as well if you want to do that. But comments I really
Like
do like.
and comment. Yeah.
Yeah, and if you haven't subscribed yet, do that as well. I'm gonna be rating Stardust, and I do want to say thank you, Liana, for coming on. I really do appreciate.